And who's got a class on Friday evening? And who's got a class on Saturday? Do you?
I have class on Friday evening, but it's like...
So that goes to 1 a.m.? 6 till 9, but 9 is still technically Friday. So at midnight you turn into a pumpkin and it becomes the next day, yeah? So Saturday it is, a unanimous vote. We're going to do the extra classes on Saturday. All day. Of course. Yeah. Oh, there'll be 2 sessions. There'll be morning and afternoon session on Saturday. Lucky you. I beg your pardon? It's going to have to be Saturday, that's it. Sat. There goes my golf. I'll fit in an extra practice day, maybe on Thursday, to make up for it. I'll cope. Now, those of you having computer troubles, we do offer degrees in IT here at Macquarie University, but as well, we've apparently installed MS Project in the EMC building in G210 and G220. So that might help some of you who are having computer problems. Yeah? Wonders never cease. Eh? Now, any questions about the assignment? I saw on the forum one student asked, how do I allocate resources? Well, I'd refer you to the last tutorials on MS Project, and you have to use your imagination. That's part of planning. You have available a large pool. The aim is not to use the whole pool of resources, as would normally be the case. In working out a plan, you do a work breakdown structure, you do a resource allocation in terms of generically what you need, but we don't have generic people. We have real people that have to be allocated, and they have to know what they're doing and can't be available for other projects once you've allocated them to yours. And immediately we see a huge flaw here, because as soon as your project runs late, you don't need those allocated resources any longer. You need them later in the project. Okay, so any questions? Any questions? No? No questions? Okay. So, we've got lots of facilities around the university where you can sit and chit-chat to your heart's content. Please avail yourself. At the moment, we're going to be talking about DSDM. And unless you've got something to contribute about DSDM, then I'd rather you're not talking. Thank you. So, what we've seen so far in the first 3 weeks of this course is the project manager has the responsibility to deliver on the stakeholders' expectations. But is this always feasible? Yes or no? No, it's often not feasible. What makes it infeasible? David? Unrealistic expectations could be. What else? That's a good catch-all, covers everything, but more specifically, what could be unrealistic? Yeah, the time schedule. That's right. So hold on. So it could be the time frame is too short. I don't think anybody's ever complained the time frame being too long. The cost, the budget. Again, nobody's complained you've given me too much money. It's too little money. What else? Yeah, insufficient resources, which relates to cost. Resources cost money, but it could be an organizational breakdown structure in a matrix where you're allocating insufficient resources. David? Yes, yeah, that's quality / functionality. typically we'd be talking about. And interestingly, some of the most challenging projects involve integration with other systems. Because these days, most competent developers can knock together a standalone application. Clearly, beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Some apps will have better usability than others. Some will be more elegant. Missing functionality can often be added later. It can go over budget, over schedule. But usually, generally speaking, as long as the requirements are quite well understood, the application can be built as standalone. But where we get into huge difficulty often, as an example, is where we have to integrate with other systems that haven't been designed to integrate with. And that's why I gave you the exercise in assignment 1 to look at a very classic problem and the electronic health record. Because you have legacy systems that were all built with their own semantics, with their own standards, and not built with APIs, not built to export data. And these are just endless workarounds to get data out of these systems, but then to get them compliant to a standard such as HL7, well, that's pretty much mission impossible. So unrealistic expectations, absolutely, here. In the electronic, in David Worthington's pilot study, so definitely a risk. That's definitely one of the risks there. So we now see that possibly our life as a project manager is a very difficult one, and that is that we're faced with these dilemmas. So should we abandon project management because it's just too damn hard? Is that the answer? No, it's not really the answer, because you end up getting promoted into the role. You sort of end up being a project manager by stealth. Often senior managers end up having to look after projects. It's unavoidable, basically. These dilemmas are unavoidable. Now, in construction, we saw the Opera House as an extreme example of how even in construction things can go wrong. But usually in construction, it's very well understood what the technology is, what the requirements are. Good architects will do a model that the stakeholders can go and visit the building site. We're dealing with something quite tangible. As well, you don't get the requirements creep. You don't have the owner of the project saying, well, I know we specified 5 stories, but look, I've had a change of heart. I'd like 10 stories, please. In countries like Australia, where we have good regulations, except with the Opal Tower, yes, generally speaking, usually speaking, because of the approvals necessary, because the design has to be consistent with the approval required and meet the required building code, that there isn't the opportunity for stakeholders to fiddle around with the design. You don't get the unit holders once they're given the unit. This is actually a big problem with buying off the plan, that the builder can vary even the space, the size of your unit by 10% under the contract, can be 10% smaller, and can actually look quite different to what you are led to believe. And the contract you've signed gives you no rights whatsoever to seek compensation or to have the design changed. It's all written in favour of the builder. So it's a very interesting risk in buying off the plan, which a few years ago was all the craze in Sydney. Now, thankfully, the heat's come out of the market and more common sense can prevail. But my point is, here the builder builds it as economically as they see fit and design it as they see fit. And the customer has no ability to change the product. Does that happen in IT? Never happens in IT. The customer always wants to make changes. We're dealing with an intangible. We're dealing with something that is theoretically infinitely malleable, but then we end up with the never-ending story. We end up with what was a good application, some good software that ends up turning into something horrible because of all the faults introduced from all the many changes and all the inconsistencies. Inconsistencies are built in and conflicts are built in. So that with software, we're particularly susceptible to this problem of scope creep. Okay, so these issues are not new. They've been known for quite some time, for decades in fact. And there's two very well regarded approaches to solve these problems, two agile methodologies. DSDM, which comes from the Brits and has traction in Europe, and the Rational Unified Process, RUP, that comes from IBM and is American. Personally, I actually prefer RUP. It's a bit more to the point. It's a bit more just do it, you know. It's a bit more philosophical. This is the philosophy here. Now you go and adapt it. DSDM, you can see, has had many more stakeholders involved. You can see it's been made quite complex, in fact, to try and meet all of these additional, as it always happens with standards, you have so many fingers in the pie, so many people interested that those who put together a standard end up building a much bigger standard than was probably originally envisaged. So DSDM is a bit bulky in my opinion, but it's different. You'll see tonight we'll do DSDM and next week we'll do RUP, and you choose, especially you're asked in your assignments, your group assignments, what is your project methodology? And we don't mean the process model of the application, which is something that we're looking at in ITEC 832, is process management. That's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the project process, how you go about doing the project. And don't do water, scrum, fall. This is a reference that Stephen will give you when he talks about DevOps. DevOps is really interesting. It's another continuation of Agile, where the problem is if you're very agile and you're releasing continuous iterations, you have a problem with ops, the operational side of the organization, who can't cope with all these continuous releases. So DevOps was designed to address that, and we might get next semester. Depends whether I'm doing all of it. It depends on. I'm not sure. But I've got a former student, Joanne Nash, who heads up the financial system. She runs a contracting firm, but she's contracted by the State Department of Health to run their financial systems, and so this is a very conservative Oracle financial system, and her team does a release every 2 weeks for the Department of Health. So it can be done. You can have DevOps even with a very conservative culture, with a very bureaucratic culture, just getting the users used to the fact it's going to change. And we are getting used to that because of our consumer IT, in terms of it's never ending, that all your apps are updating continuously, and as well as from a corporate perspective, using a SaaS system, it's continuously changing too. So DevOps is this culture of continuous change. But what I was referring to, and there's a little trap, especially with DSDM, is the trap, and you'll see this in their own words, I'll point it out later, is this water, scrum, fall trap. And that is to meet the bureaucratic needs of the engineered approach, where we do this big design up front, and hence we issue a contract, a fixed price contract, issue that contract to meet these bureaucratic needs. You have, this waterfall approach, but what you do is it's tokenism. You pay a token to the project manager who says, I want to run an agile project. Well, that's fine. It's up to you. But here, these are the requirements. This is the schedule you've got. This is how long you've got. This is how much money you've got. And if you guys want to go stand up in a scrum every day, you know, and do a burn down, a 2-week burn down on your iteration, and you want to do pair programming, and you want to adopt these agile techniques, well, you know, whatever floats your boat. Enjoy. Go. You're the project manager. You do that. And that's what a Scrum for. Iterative development is good as long as you address the most difficult problems first. So nothing wrong with that, but it just doesn't embody the whole agile philosophy. And that's why still we've got, I think, IT projects that are still failing, because large enterprises, bureaucratic enterprises, can't get their heads around this sort of methodology. And DSDM knows that and has an explicit way of addressing that too. So let's have a look at the specifics. Sometimes the easiest way to learn is just jump right in, but hopefully we'll have a bit of time at the end. I want you to have a look at healthcare.gov. It's the Obamacare website, and to implement the Affordable Health Care Act, and it was an absolute disaster, in fact, in putting together. And it's not as if the Americans can't build a website. They invented the World Wide Web, and this had substantial budget and expertise behind it. It was the integration complexity that initially killed it. It's up and running now, and when it did get up and running, but with a lot of embarrassment and very late. And there's a military project director who did a criticism in Forbes magazine of what went wrong. And we'll have a look at each of the issues he addressed in his critique and see whether DSDM might have helped us. Just see, try and apply it to something as big and complex as healthcare.gov, just as an example. But you're going to have to use an example of an agile approach, a specific agile approach for your group projects. And it's these 2 weeks, this week and next week, that should give you the foundation to confidently do that. So, the Agile Business Consortium, a non-profit UK-based consortium, they were established in the mid-90s to promote rapid application development software methods. And so as a RAD method, they invented dynamic system development method. But it's evolved over the year to be an agile methodology, and now they've changed the definition to driving strategy, delivering more, rather than just talking about system development. Now, this is where the Water Scrum Fall comes in, because it's designed to be used with either PMI, PMBOK, which is Larson. Larson is very much following the American strategy, and Prince 2 is the British project management strategy. So you can use it. Basically, DSDM can operate within as a concentric circle. If we're doing a Venn diagram, and this is where you get the Water Scrum Fall, unfortunately. Here, I guess some progress has been made, but not really, in my opinion. It doesn't help you with the fundamental risks. In fact, the project is still very risky. So one way to do it is where you have DSDM operating internally within a PMBOK or a Prince 2. Prince 2 framework can be done, but Forrester is very critical of that. We've got the latest version, the DSDM Agile Project Framework from 2014 onwards, meaning they keep tweaking the handbook, but it's freely available, which is very good for us. So the material tonight comes from that handbook, from that link I gave you in the first slide. Originally designed for IT projects, but anything complex, risky, that can be delivered in an iterative way. So no good for construction, because you can't decide along the way how you're going to build. Although, for the Opera House they did work it out as they went along, how they're going to build it. But something iterative, such as a project of business change management, as an example, that can be done iteratively in phases, and then evaluating the results of each phase. So if what we learn from large enterprises are that we call this strategic drift, is year on year on year they pretty much do the same thing, because their strategic planning is all based on historical, it's all based on what they know, but then they have a disruptor. Someone comes into the market, changes their business model, changes the way in which the market operates, and they've got to adapt very, very quickly, got to change quickly to the new way of doing it, but they don't know how. So that sort of strategic change could be done in an agile way, is addressing the priority projects first within the program, and then iterating based on the feedback that you get. So Agile is very different. In the engineered approach, we have a fixed solution. They're the requirements. Agile says no. Your requirements are not fixed. They need to be prioritized. We need a prioritized requirements list, not a huge shopping list, not casting a wide net. The typical IT projects are delivered late. Agile is delivered early. How could it be delivered early? How? How? Yeah, by prioritizing, but beg pardon? Failing early or non-delivered early, that's a good way of being delivered early. But by prioritized, yes, giving the minimum usable subset very early. This is a criticism of healthcare.gov. They had years to build the site, but they spent half the time just talking about it. This is a huge problem with complex projects. Far too much big design up front, far too much documentation, far too much requirement solicitation. Just jump in and try it. And see, is that giving you a solution? No, well, what's wrong with it? Why is this not a solution? Well, what are the minimum components necessary for it to be a solution? And in fact, the government has done that. If we look at My Health Record, as I've told you, it's a Dropbox. They're vacuum cleaning. They're sucking up into this file server system whatever files they can get from whichever hospitals, from whichever pathology, from whichever GP, specialist systems. They're just putting in whatever they can get. So actually, we should applaud them, because that's the only feasible way to go forward on a project like this. So, to build a system, which was David's brief, was a single delivery, this pilot electronic healthcare system for your assignment. But in reality, if we're adopting an agile approach, it's multiple deliveries. That's how we deliver early, is because we deliver the minimum usable subset first. The features are not what's promised, because we learn from stakeholders that they don't really know. That what they're doing is casting a very wide net, too wide a net, in fact, for features that probably they're not even going to use. And they don't know what's feasible in terms of features they haven't considered. So what we want instead is a prioritized list. With traditional engineered approach, the project managers focused internally to get the work done, like the foreman on a building site. The foreman on the building site doesn't question the plans. The foreman has to make sure The builder has to make sure that the workers are building exactly to plan. Whereas in Agile, the project manager is externally focused on context, on the environment. We keep hearing context is more important than content. That traditionally the project manager is the boss, it's a command and control, like I'm doing with this class. I got you all quiet, command and control. Because this is process work, I'm the boss, right? I'm ensuring productivity. Whereas for Agile, it is collaborative within your team. Because the idea is, if you've got a dog, why are you doing the barking? That you hire very good people to do work and you give them autonomy to do that work, to achieve the results. Agile's growing. It's a bit old, this survey, but it seems to be doubling every year. And it's bigger than Prince 2, which is very nice to see, because Prince 2 is very bureaucratic. So here's the structure of the handbook that we'll get through tonight. It's a bit tedious, I know, but I didn't design this handbook. As I say, this is not my favorite. I prefer RUP because it just has 4 stages: inception, elaboration, construction, and transition, and that's it. That's RUP. 4 steps. There's a bit to each step, of course. There'll be a bit of detail, don't you worry, but 4 steps. You're friendly. No harm in that. So if we look at the foundation of DSDM, that the idea is that we start with a strategy. Remember from Larson we heard that strategy is implemented through projects, that meaningful projects contribute to the business strategy. And that what happens with the deployment of the technology, the new system, is it changes processes. If it hasn't changed processes, how are we going to get Iraqis? Improve revenue, avoid cost, or improve service. How are these business benefits going to be delivered if we're doing the same old thing? Those of you in ITEC 832, you've got to change the process with your technology. Add the technology to change the process to meet the strategy of the hospital procurement department to reduce purchase costs. Must be an easier way than that. To reduce purchase costs, to reduce cycle time, solve the backorder problem, solve the 3-way match problem. Gee, you've got a bit of work ahead of you to change processes. And after you've re-engineered the new process, then you have to nominate what would be the suitable technology that would meet the strategy. And of course, you have to get the people on board. You have to train the people and have their support. And it's really quite identical to Levitt's diamond. Levitt talked about this in the 1980s. What Levitt was really trying to say is technology doesn't exist on its own. If we're just implementing technology because we think it's cool and a good idea, it probably isn't either cool or a good idea. That it has to relate to the structure of the organization, that it has to, we have to have business process re-engineering, and we have to bring in the people. So very similar to Levitt's concept, Levitt's diamond. So why use DSDM? Why are we interested? Because projects fail more so because of people than technology. Most of the technology we're using is standard technology, not novel technology. Nothing novel in the technology being proposed for David Worthington. His project is a disaster, absolute disaster. So the traditional approach is to attack all perceived possibilities, to have too broad a requirement set. But what would be more pragmatic, more risk-averse, is to build a much simpler system that has the minimum usable subset that's fit for the purpose, and then continuously upgrade that. Because then we can be very flexible based on what the users, what the stakeholders are telling us in what they need. And with very big projects, we suffer an analysis paralysis. We end up with very costly solutions. So it can be convergent, but I don't like the way in which that's done. It really should be a different philosophy. And DSDM offer a certification. Oh, what have I done? I've lost them. No, they're here. The packet leaks. It leaks, but it's okay, I still have them. And my throat's going, so. Oh, sorry. It helps. I'm going to have to try and talk not so loud. Theresa May lost her voice. And she was croaking away, still arguing, of course, for her Brexit deal. Wouldn't like to have her job at the moment. Her own party doesn't even side with her. And she just tries to use basic logic with them. And that is, who's in favour of crashing out of the EU and having no Brexit deal? And the majority say, yep. Labour and the Tories, the opposition and the government both seem to agree on that. That was one of the resolutions that went through. We prefer not to have a no-deal Brexit. Okay, you want a deal. Well, we're dealing with the EU, and this is the deal that they're prepared to give us. She might prevail. We'll see. The other solution would be to call a general election, to lose government to Labour, and let Labour have a second referendum, and with the millennials now able to vote, who weren't able to vote in 2016, it's thought that the second referendum would probably not be in favour of Brexit.
A lot of the things that they said as well, like instead of giving the EU 2.2 billion with the NHS or something.
Yeah, and that never worked because they're still on the hook. They're still on the hook for all that money. They were lied to, absolutely. But then probably on the other side too, a lot of fear mongering as well. So probably both sides lied. But that would be interesting because if you have a second referendum, then that empowers the government either way. Because now people have voted for the Brexit as we know it is this deal on the table. We don't know any more than this. So if you vote for Brexit, you are voting for the current deal. If you're voting no, well, we don't have to worry about any deal whatsoever. And so the new government would have a mandate either way on the people who voted, either to take the deal that we know of or to change their mind and stay in the EU, which would be more likely. So wouldn't that be more agile? Wouldn't that break the deadlock? Have a general election. If the government falls, the government falls. It's the will of the people. That's a democracy. Labour have said they would have another referendum. That would be very much in favour of Labour getting voted in fact. If that's what the people want, that's what the people want. Then they have another referendum. It's most likely to stay in the EU. We have a solution. So here's applying agile thinking to a very vexing problem that Britain is facing right now. Because Agile says, we're just the passive conduit of the stakeholders. You tell us what you want. We'll put on the table and tell you what the options are. But you tell us what you want. Shouldn't the voting public be the stakeholder here for Brexit? I doubt that will happen. It's just too obvious a solution. Yeah, could get lucky. Could get lucky. If she if the government fails and no
Been
confidence.
lobbying, though, for holding a general election just on this one topic. And why have you lost us power?
No, she's holding on to power for power's sake. It's politics. But not, in my opinion, it's just an opinion, is not democratically leading the government if the people don't wish to continue with Brexit. And now that you have a deal on the table, now you have the rationale to put it to the people. Greece did that. With they had a referendum. Should they accept the financial deal from the European Central Bank, the ECB, and the people said, no, don't take it. They didn't take it, and they ended up having to pay a lot more. But Tsipras, the Prime Minister, stayed in power because he adhered to the will of the people, even though the people were wrong. You were wrong to reject the deal because that was the only deal on the table, and no deal meant that all the banks closed. And all they could do is withdraw, I think, 100 euros a day or something for a while there, and the economy came to a complete halt. So the people voted wrong, but that's okay. That's what democracy was invented in Greece, democracy. Okay. So Agile is a whole philosophy. I'm having a bit of fun with it here, but it's a change of thinking and not getting locked in to infeasible results. So here are the key problems. One problem is this handoff, where business cooks up this idea for a new system in line with strategy, very nice, and says to the IT contractor or the internal IT group, go and do it. And so that creates an immediate communication problem. Do what? To what standard? To what features? And so DSDM addresses very proactively a communication problem through facilitated workshops, lots of modeling, lots of prototyping, which we'll see. DSDM specific addresses the late delivery because it aims for early delivery with a minimum usable subset. It works very specifically on not meeting the business expectations because of the collaboration required and the rich understanding, and maybe the rich understanding that there's no feasible solution and failing early. And then unused features. DSDM doesn't permit it because it has a prioritized requirements list and a burn down on that. Business changing their mind, is that okay with DSDM? It is. It's your project. You can change your mind. And we see here the British electorate seems to want to change their mind, but there isn't a process within the Parliament. So DSDM embraces change through the iterative development regular reviews. It expects change. This delayed or late ROI by delivering early and delivering what the business needs means we get an early ROI. And we avoid over-engineering and gold plating because the business says when enough's enough. So iterative development, it means that the users are much more likely to claim ownership because they've been involved in the development process and the trade-off that happens in terms of defining the scope. We're much less likely to have built the wrong solution because they're seeing the very early feasibility and they're seeing the prototypes and working with each iteration. There's a business representative. So much more likely to meet their real business requirements rather than what was perceived. The users will be better trained because they've been involved in, their representatives have been involved in the system development, and deployment is more likely to go smoothly because there's greater acceptance of the solution, and it's a process for the organization to deliver working solutions consistently on time and on budget. What's really fundamental to DSDM is the iron triangle gets flipped. So For so far we've learnt about the iron triangle, and we've learnt that a project is bound by this triangle here, that it has a certain schedule, it has a budget, a cost, and what's required are features / quality. They're much the same thing. The scope of the project. And you as a project manager have to deliver all three. Even Larson disagreed with that, and Larson said, pick two. We offer 3 types of service: fast, cheap and good. Pick 2. Fast and good won't be cheap. Cheap and fast won't be good. Good and cheap won't be fast. So Larson is aware of that concept. But DSDM says more specifically, you tell us what time constraint we have, you tell us what cost and quality you're after, and we'll tell you what features we can deliver. It's completely flipping the iron triangle. And why would bureaucrats be flipped out by this? Well, they want the bottom one. They want what they're paying for, which is what the business has specified. Businesses come with these requirements. Huge list. Your job, deliver. Now, who can give it to me in the cheapest, with the cheapest price and the quickest time? Good, it's your job. So this happens in construction. If we look at the craze in Sydney, what would happen is a developer would look at the zoning of the land, and state government is pushing councils to zone more higher density, especially around train stations, around shopping centres, where there's more infrastructure. So the developer picks up on the change of zoning, or can sometimes influence council to zone within their consistent with the developer strategy. Then they acquire the land that they need. They give a very typically they pay double what the market price is for the land, and the group of homeowners will sell because it's like winning lotto. Firstly, they get a very good deal. Secondly, if one refuses and one in the middle refuses to sell, none of the others can sell, and so there's a moral obligation, a community obligation, is to help the neighbours out, and so they will sell. So now the developer knows what the cost of land is. They know from the zoning rules how many units they can build. They've got very good apportion methods we've talked about, $1,500 to $2,000 a square metre is the building cost. So they can plug that in, and so they can work out what their profitability will be. Then the bank requires a certain number of units, usually 75% of the block, to be pre-sold to reduce the risk that the market drops and you can't sell the units. And so then they can get the finance for that, and then they sling it over, the developer slings it over to the builder, who has tendered the best price, and that's where the value engineering occurs. And that's why a lot of these buildings are going to have problems about 5 years down the track, and they only give a warranty for 2 years. And so they build in problems that will eventuate in 5 years' time, because that's out of warranty. But that's typically, it takes a number of summers and winters and rain, a certain amount of the elements to affect the building, contraction and expansion, for the problems to occur where they should have used better materials. So we're going to see a whole slew of issues around the apartment blocks being built.
But then they can rezone it, knock it down and build another one.
Okay, and then that provides employment and keeps the economy going. How true. But so we see in construction how the iron triangle can be met, because really it's a process for the developer, a cunning process. The developer has very good patterns to work with. I mean, still a lot of them go bankrupt. It's still a fairly risky business, But generally speaking, we've seen a huge boom in construction. So that's the difference really that we face between the construction paradigm, where the engineered approach can work very well, to the IT approach, where what we want to do is exactly the opposite, is float the features and fix the time and cost. So the bureaucrats won't like it. So there's a challenge for us. So if we look at the composition of DSDM, it has a philosophy, it has principles, it's built on process, people, products and practices. They're all P's, very catchy. And of course it's underpinned by common sense and pragmatism. It's a bit of a smorgasbord where you take from the smorgasbord what you need for your project. So the philosophy is it must be a meaningful project. So that's consistent with what we did last week. Is this alignment with strategic goals, that key stakeholders understand the business objectives and are empowered, and collaborative. So we need both of these things. We need the stakeholders having authority within the project, and they need to have a collaborative predisposition. And the solution we deliver according to the priorities set by the business, so we need close communication and change. That the requirements are not fixed, that you have to be prepared to accept that change is inevitable as we understand more about the solution, which in fact, from an agile perspective, change is a good thing. From a bureaucratic perspective, change is a bad thing. So the principles are based on that philosophy, is to focus on the business need, to deliver on time, deliver early actually, to collaborate, never compromise quality, build incrementally, develop iteratively, these are really the same thing, communicate continuously and demonstrate control of the finances. That the huge risk with an IT project is it's out of control, that lots of money is spent and very little is delivered. Vaporware. So focusing on the business need, you have to understand the true business priorities. There needs to be a sound business case, continuous business sponsorship, and your job is to guarantee, if it's feasible, the minimum usable subset. So we use elements here of DSDN that we're going to talk about. You'll see this come up quite. So the business products in the foundation phase relate to the business case, and the priorities, the time boxing. Make sure that we have a deliverable, because otherwise you have the never-ending story. So each iteration is time boxed to 2 to 4 weeks. What's Moscow? Do we go and ask the Russians for help?
They'll charge a premium.
Will they? I don't know. It might be good value. So what's Moscow? Must have, should have, could have, won't have. So in terms of the prioritized requirements list, the M is the must, absolutely must. The S is we'd like to have, should. We should have these features. If time and money permits, we could have these features. And the W is very important. We've talked about this, and this is out of scope. We won't have, so don't try and backdoor these features. We've already said they're out of scope and are not happening. So Moscow, an acronym for prioritization. Sorry, David?
But they changed their mind and now they're in scope.
Not according to Moscow. Okay. It makes for a good acronym. So delivering on time. Late projects are very damaging. The opportunity, the market window, for instance, Apple with the iPhone, they're going to be very late with 5G. That's very bad, Tim Cook. If I had a chat to Tim, I'd say, you're going to miss your window. Samsung's going to have quite an advance on you and the Chinese manufacturers with 5G phones well before the iPhone is 5G enabled. Holdable. Foldable, yeah, today. Yeah, I know. But they're about $3,500. To me, that's a slight preclusion. You can get a tablet for $500. A phone maybe for $500. Anyway, they'll come down in price. So I think Apple is making a poor strategic decision in not coming out promptly with a 5G phone, because that would be an impetus for people to upgrade their phones finally. Something new, something different is a faster network. Then we can enjoy the faster processor and the more memory, and things will come down the pipe at us quicker, which is good for streaming video, for example, watching Netflix. Why not? On the train. Why not? So the market opportunity can evaporate if we don't deliver on time. It could be a legal or compliance deadline. Just ask Combank and the huge fine they got from their smart ATMs with regard to not meeting compliance requirements on reporting to reduce money laundering, to address money laundering. So they were fined millions for that. So not complying on time can be very costly. And we have often unsupported legacy systems that's a hard deadline as well. So sometimes the deadlines are not negotiable. Like healthcare.gov, it needed to be ready by the time the legislation was enacted, and it wasn't. And that was very damaging to the Obama government. Collaborate is another principle. That the team will involve the right stakeholders at the right time. They need to be available. The business advocate, business representative, needs to be available to the team, embedded in the team. Ensure the members of the team are empowered to take decisions on behalf of those they represent. That's a change of thinking too. Actively involve the business representative, build a one-team culture in business and IT. And never compromising on quality, setting that level at the beginning. It's not a variable. Design, document, test. Every iteration is tested. Microsoft has been doing this since the 90s. They have a strategy called sync and stabilize, where they have daily builds that are fully regression tested. So every day there's a version of the software that is available to marketing to release if they wanted to. Build in quality by constant review, test early and continuously. So build incrementally. It's an iterative development here. Early delivery, continuously confirm the correct solution, formally reassess priorities. So this iterative development is identify the requirements for the iteration, plan the iteration, build it, and review, and we'll see this later in a bit more detail. So do enough design up front to create strong foundations. It's not big design up front, which is the failure of many complex systems. Iterative approach, getting customer feedback on each iteration, so both the team and the customer understand. It's a learning exercise. They're understanding more about the solution, that the detail emerges later rather than sooner, because the detail emerges as our understanding improves, this funnel of improvement. Embracing change, the right solution will not emerge without change. Be creative, experiment, learn, evolve. And you can see that's the problem with Brexit, is the government's locked into a certain thinking from 2016 and are not changing, not evolving. And they're the laughing stock of the world over their inability to decide, to make a decision on Brexit. communicate continuously and clearly. And sure, here's the Scrum bit, the daily stand-up sessions, but facilitated workshops with business, rich communication, modeling and prototyping, instances of the evolving solution early and often, to turn the application to something tangible. Manage stakeholder expectations, because they're involved throughout the whole project, informal, face-to-face. So DSDM doesn't like the distributed team that we have very much in IT, a team of contractors. We're a bunch of minimalists, really, because a contractor is a professional who is paid to do a specific job. No more. If you want the contractor to do more, you have to adjust the contract to pay more, and no less, because less would mean they still wouldn't get paid because they haven't met the contract requirements. So the contractor is very rigid. So this is not so conducive to change. You can, of course, partner with the contractor and say, this is going to be fluid and we'll pay you time and materials. The problem is there, and especially with government, has always been the problem when that's the case, is the contractor overcharges. Seems the Australian government paid a fortune for food to be sent to Manus Island to take care of the detainees. The contractor there had an open contract and charged double what they should have. So there's problems either way dealing with contractors, with a fixed contract or a variable. Trust would be a good thing. You've got someone you can trust. Demonstrate control. So the worst thing for business is this out-of-control project where money is being spent hand over fist, such as, if we look at the Brexit debate is completely out of control. Trump and his wall, completely out of control. It's very damaging to any country or any organisation if we're not exhibiting control. If we look at ITEC 841, very much in control. Your assignment has a very specific requirement, very specific time, date, it's due. Software issues have been fully resolved. Your downloads, and now we have the labs even available. No excuse, basically. Yeah? Tight control. The university's happy then. See? So, appropriate level of formality for tracking and reporting. Stephen doesn't check in with me every week. He knows what I'm doing. But if you complain to him about something, he'll follow it up. I betcha. So that's the appropriate level in this instance, as an example. The department will follow up on complaints. Make plans and progress visible to all. Measure progress. We focus on delivery of products. Manage proactively. Evaluate continuing project viability. Project may no longer be viable. And that's part of control too, is failing often, failing early. That out of control is failing at the end. So preparation. One of the P's, the principles, 5 principles, all with P's. So preparation. And this is the most problematic aspect of using DSDM. Acceptance of the philosophy before starting work. That's where we come unstuck. That's where we grind to a halt. But the big bureaucratic organisation will not accept the change in philosophy. Yet it is so obvious. To get the right thing at the right time and handle change dynamically may result in delivering less than 100% of the possible solution. But Waterfall seeks to deliver 100%, the engineered approach. The only slight issue is it sometimes delivers 0. So that's our fundamental risk to the project, that the project fails to deliver. It becomes vaporware, something unusable, unwanted that sits on the shelf. So the bureaucratic engineered approach is the ostrich approach in terms of putting your head in the sand with regard to risk. Does not address risk adequately. So preparation, appropriate empowerment of the development team to make day-to-day decisions. Again, the bureaucracy doesn't like it. The bureaucracy wants to see change request forms submitted to the Change Request Review Committee, who meet once a week and who don't like approving change requests unless they really have to. Too slow, too inflexible, too bureaucratic. The project manager reluctant to even submit the changes. Commitment of senior business manager to provide the necessary business ambassador. Business likes to just handball it to the project team. Tell us when you're done. In fact, this approach requires embedding the business ambassador within the team, representing the business, what the business needs are. Approving each of the, prioritizing the requirements during the time boxes and approving the deliverable after the time box. That the solution is not going to be delivered in one go. It's going to be delivered incrementally, which some organizations are very resistant to change. When this is saying you're going to have to change continuously. This is the reason why Boeing's market capitalization has dropped by billions of dollars. This exact reason of change, incremental delivery. So, I mentioned it to you, I think, last week, and all the reports are bearing this out. The 737 MAX 8 has got bigger engines. It goes further, that's why it's a MAX 8. Because of the bigger engines, Boeing felt there was a bigger risk of the plane stalling when it's trying to climb. So Boeing built this MACS software where if a sensor sees the plane is potentially stalling, it points the nose down. And both the Lion Air crash and the Ethiopian Air crash, the satellite data, because we're using IoT, Internet of Things, the engines are constantly sending data to satellites. Satellite data is showing that the plane went up, down, crash, you know. A dozen times or so with the Lion Air, the crew were wrestling to get control of the plane because the automated system kept on pushing the nose down, because sometimes the system is rarely, compared to how many, I guess, flights are taking off all the time on this aircraft, but twice already, the software is getting faulty data from the nose sensor. So the plane is not stalling, and the correct approach is not to point the nose down. But Boeing took a cheapskate decision that the pilots didn't need to be separately trained on this new system, and which would mean that it's a lot more expensive to the airlines to acquire the MAX 8, because all the pilots need to be qualified on the MAX 8, because it's different. Boeing convinced the Federal Aviation Authority in America there's no change. This is consistent with the regular 737. It's there in the manual, but the pilot has to refer to the manual. We don't need to retrain the pilots. When in fact this was the devastating mistake because the pilots didn't know what was didn't know what was happening and wrestled with the plane and didn't know how to switch off the system. Now, of course, the system will try once, and if the pilots regain control, it won't try again, but they'll be aware of it too, and there'll be a manual override, but it will not keep, so they're going to make a lot of changes to it. But it all came about this reluctance to implement change, because that adds cost to the airlines. And then, of course, knowing from Lion Air, knowing that their system is heavily flawed, not to have voluntarily then grounded the planes until A, they could make changes to the system, that pilots don't have to wrestle with it a dozen times until the system wins and the plane crashes. That they didn't voluntarily ground the planes to say, we need to adjust this software, and by the way, we were wrong. Pilots need special training in this, and accepting responsibility for their mistake. Now their whole reputation is absolutely trashed. So organizations are reluctant to change. Boeing didn't want to change the training, change the system, change. They made a mistake, they got it wrong, that happens. People died because of their mistake, and now more people died because of their mistake. And it took countries like China to independent. I know China loved it, I guess. We're grounding all these American planes. Hurting Trump. Hurting a major American company. And then only after China grounded all the planes did Trump issue an executive order to also overrule the FAA, who are clearly asleep at the wheel or far too close to Boeing. So change is a requirement. We've seen this huge disaster because they didn't change. So we need ambassador roles for both the solution team and the business, and we need team stability and team co-location. Size, this is an issue too, that the team, according to DSDM, should not be too big because it gets dysfunctional. So for large projects, we have to split it up into multiple teams, and then we have to coordinate those teams. And there's even a questionnaire in the handbook that the stakeholders, the business and the sponsor and the users all have to sign this questionnaire, answer the questionnaire and sign it, to say we're using DSD, and these are the ramifications. And this is where we come unstuck totally, because there's not an alignment with culture. Yeah?
Just regarding to the Boeing, I think,
Okay.
made a mistake just because Airbus A380 took away the market from them, and they were pretty struggling to make changes. So I guess it's just they took everything so quickly that they didn't realize that they have to make some changes.
Yeah, but it's a reluctance to change. Why didn't they train the pilots on the new system? Because they don't want to incur that cost to their clients. When the first plane went down, why didn't they make changes to the system? So all it is an example that now the cost is far greater to them in every which way. Financially, in their share price, in goodwill, in terms of potential clients for the 737 MAX 8, and in the loss of life. Cost them very dearly. So the questionnaire, you can read that for yourself. This is the points in the questionnaire that have to be agreed to amongst all the stakeholders. So here we have the process, the DSDM process. There's a pre-project. So pre-project is the strategic development process, developing the strategy, and then authorizing, funding the project, but then an initial feasibility stage to see whether the project can even be done. If it's deemed as being feasible, we have the foundations. So the foundations are the minimum requirements the technology, the technical proof of concept. Then we iteratively develop the project, which is assembling the components, reviewing all the components, to testing, and then deploy and post-project review. I'll leave it at that, and we'll take a break and come back after the break. get through quite quickly. So this is the main model actually for DSDM. So the approach, delivery is iterative and incremental. The business representatives see the solution as it involves. And it puts project management and product development into the single process. That is, that the negotiations with the business is running alongside developing each iteration. So pre-project, what we want to see, according to the DSDM philosophy, that best business value emerges when projects are aligned to clear strategic goals. And we had a good look from Larson on this need for strategy to be set first and strategy implemented through projects. So after pre-project, after we have like a matrix scoring system as an example, where we consider financial metrics and strategic alignment to our key objectives, after we've scored the project and determined it's of high interest to us, we then have to look at its feasibility, whether there is a solution to the business problem, even before we look at how much it's going to cost, how long it's going to take. Gentlemen, you can go back outside if you like. There's no problem, lots of places to chit-chat, but not in my back corner, thank you. It's not the right place, is it? Well, no, not appropriate. Up there, appropriate. In here, talk about something on the slide, even the 737 MAX 8 or Brexit, if you like. I bring in contemporary issues to make it more interesting, make it more relevant to us. Get us talking. It's not abstract. We all know it's feasible, that there is a solution to the problem, and that the benefits are likely to arise from the delivery of the proposed solution. How would we deliver? How would we implement? And what sort of governance are we going to need for this project? And first cut estimates. And this is top down, first cut. So we can plan resource, at least the foundation phase. So we're taking an option on the project. This is only resourcing the next step of getting, for instance, a technical proof of concept. This is not building the system yet. We're not committed at this stage. So foundations means the original feasibility looks good, that we think we have a solution, we believe that implementing that solution will deliver the business benefits. Let's now look at our architecture. What are the high-level requirements, the minimum usable set? We can now flesh out. You see, you do as much documentation as needed. You do the documentation as you go, rather than big design up front. So we want to then detail the business case, designing the solution architecture, the technical requirements, how quality will be assured, that there's appropriate control, governance, what's the life cycle going to be, and risk. We look at risk very early on. We consider what are the key risks, and we treat those risks up front. Lots of business inputs required. Only produce enough. This is very agile. Only produce sufficient foundation products to move the project to the first iteration, from prototype to the first usable system. Needs a sound business case. Look at this, stopping the project now. Too risky, too costly, low benefits. That's successful. That comes from DSDM. That's a successful outcome of the foundation phase, is stopping early, killing the project. It looked feasible, but then when we started prototyping, trying to put together a technical proof of concept, see, David Worthington would have seen this, that trying to integrate with all of these systems is just not feasible, certainly not feasible to have it all compliant to an esoteric standard that nobody complies with. So you'd know straight away it's not feasible. you wouldn't go to the foundation stage. So now we evolve. Now we continuously evolve, working with time boxes here. We produce solution increments. Then we deploy. We get the solution into live use, beta, ideally. DSDM is a bit vague on this. RUP is much more explicit about a transition phase and what to do. But the idea is you release the alpha is a working version of the system, but the beta is one that's functional, that should work. And the games manufacturers are very astute with this, in engaging with very loyal gamers, giving them an early peek at the beta, and then working like mad to try and fix all the problems that have been identified by the beta users. So they get free testers, because the developers don't know how the gamers are actually going to interact with the game, how they're going to stress the game, and that's a very good way of getting the quality sufficient before release. So post-project is we need to review. We need to do two things. We need to realize the benefits. Management should thou shalt the system, in terms of telling the users thou shalt use it, ensuring the system is being used, ensuring that we're managing the benefits realization, and doing a review too as to what we learned in doing the project and how could we do it better. So there are lots of roles here explicitly designed, but the color coding is very good. So the orange is the business interest, the green is the technical, and the blue is the management. You as the project manager, you are blue. Here, you are not green. You are not the solution developer. You're not the solution tester. You're not the subject matter expert, technical advisor. It's not your role. It's very explicit in DSDM. This is what we make the big mistakes. Okay, for small projects, very technical projects, well, the team lead is the project manager. But for large, complex projects, no. You've got a dog, why are you doing the barking? So here you sit with the business visionary who represents the business sponsor here, your boss here. This is the wishes of the business, with the technical coordinator who's talking to the technical people, balancing technically what can be done with what the business wants done. And the role that bridges the two is the business analyst, technical and business. And you're fulfilling that business analyst role in ITIC 832 when you're modeling all these processes and re-engineering the processes according to the business needs. This is the role of the business analyst, typically sitting in the IT department, in fact, the BA.
I think, sir, most of the time that there's a common misconception in terms of project management that a project manager should also be
technical
lead or something.
It's ridiculous. Because if you're a good project manager, maybe you've been doing it for 3 to 5 years. Your technical skills are already out of date. They're already old. They're already rusty.
But at the same time, that even for this is just based on my experience, the expectation of the project manager is still that even for big companies, because they don't have any kind of...
I'll give you a really interesting example of a top project manager. Did anybody see Jacinta Ardern's press conference after Christchurch, the day after? It was yesterday. I saw Jacinta Ardern's press conference, and she was remarkable. She was managing the whole issue, and it was very clear she'd been listening very carefully. And there's maybe a real benefit of a female prime minister, is a woman who is potentially more collaborative, listening more to the experts and less ego involved. And she was explaining everything that's being done to secure places of worship, everything that's being done for the victims, counselling services for school children, especially in the area because they were locked down during the terrorist attack, how the perpetrator is going to be prosecuted, and answering all the questions of the media and everything. And sometimes, for instance, this Brenton Tarrant sent this manifesto by email to generic email, 30 emails in fact, and within 2 minutes of receiving it, it was sent to the parliamentary security team. And the journalist asked, why was it sent there? Why not to the police? And she said, that's the protocol. I'd have to get back to you as to the rationale for the protocol and whether the protocol needs changing. And given that there was no specific threat in the manifesto, there was nothing the police could have done at that stage. But it was very good the way she fielded every single technical, and she would say, that's an operational issue on which I cannot comment. Why we're doing it this way. And then there was like a $10,000 grant to the victims' families to pay for funeral expenses. And one of the journalists asks, but what happens if it's an overseas visitor? Can the money be sent overseas? And she said, I can't imagine why it wouldn't, but that's an operational matter that will be determined by the department, you know. But really very good, because she was asked an enormous number of technical issues, but she touched on, in her prepared speech, in her prepared briefing, she touched on every single aspect of New Zealand's response to this terror attack. And in fact, the journalists in fact, one thing wasn't known even at that stage. It seems this Brenton Tarrant was a complete loner. He wasn't associated with any white supremacist groups. So making the assumption that the intelligence agencies should have been tracking him and everything was probably impossible. But no, I think she was clever to avoid all of that. Because it's too subjective. So she stuck to the facts. She referred very much to all the different agencies. So here she is sitting very much here as the project manager for the project being New Zealand response to a terrorist attack. It's a project. And clearly she's been briefed very, very well. Well, she's asked all the right questions. And gotten answers, so she handled herself very well. And what's gone viral is Jacinta Ardern in a hijab, where the picture where she's talking to the Muslim community, trying to reassure the community that this isn't the response of New Zealand, this is the response of, regrettably, a crazed Australian. You know, he's Australian, so we get tired with this white supremacist brush. So that's an example, a very, very good example of the role being one of coordinating. So very good overview, and interesting in supporting is a business advisor, probably a subject matter expert in this area of where the system is being used, and a coach here on how to use DSDM, how to use the system, and you get accreditation as a practitioner and as a further accreditation as a coach, and then an independent workshop facilitator there to help with the communication, understanding the needs of the technical team and the business team, and again, bridging that gap. So, quite complex, overly complex here, this diagram, which is what I don't like, but it has to meet the needs of a lot of stakeholders, but essentially like a smorgasbord, you take from the process the elements that are most useful in your project. So pre-project, giving you the scope. The G stands for governance, the artifacts that relate to governance of the project. So during the feasibility here, the level of detail is low and then increases through foundation. There's another graphic that shows that. and what we want is the development of the business case, the prioritized requirements list. Then from a technical, is you see how the color, the shade, is going from light yellow to dark yellow, and here it's going from light green to darker green. We're slowly developing the solution architecture and the development approach, the iterations that we're going to do. So then each iteration involves supporting materials, prototypes, going this way, so models to begin with, prototypes of the models, support, testing and assurance, and we're iteratively developing the solution, and pieces are being outputted, churned out, pieces of the puzzle as we build the solution here. At the same time, we're thinking about the delivery plan. This is the management side. We're looking at the time boxes. Each iteration is time boxed. We're reviewing each iteration for progress. If we're not making progress, why is that so? Is it, as the foundation stage, maybe not revealed a significant technical issue requiring us cancelling the project? So that's why we need to review the time boxes, not review just at the end. And from a governance perspective, reviewing very early on the feasibility, reviewing the foundations that we have, technical proof of concept, that we have a solid architecture, and of course the project review report at the end, post-project review. And in governance too, from a business perspective, from a technical perspective, management perspective, from a business perspective, doing business benefits assessment, benefits realization. So it's a very good graphic, in fact, and summarizes this agile process as well. So we've got an evolving solution here, and we've got an evolving solution assurance, quality assurance in terms of testing. We've got a time box plan. We're reviewing each time box, each iteration. We've got a plan for deployment and a plan for benefits realization. So now, we've looked at the principles. We've looked at the DSDM actual process. It's time to have a look at specific DSDM techniques. These 5 techniques, which you should be familiar with. It tends to bounce, this handbook tends to bounce around a little bit. Moscow. Must have, should have, could have, won't have. Must have. Not legal without it. Unsafe without it. Can't deliver the business case without it. Minimum usable set. Should have. Important. Quite painful if we leave it out. But if we leave it out, might require some sort of workaround. Could have. It's wanted, but less important, less impact if left out. Probably left out. It's going to be left out. The could have. Because it's gold plating. And the won't have, because it's not going to be crept back in. We've decided, Mr. Big Shot has decided, it's out of scope. It avoids scope creep. So in Moscow, you can see the must-haves no more than 60% of the estimated effort, and then we have the should-haves and the could-haves, and the could-haves maybe around 20%. And then there are the won't-haves, won't out of stock. So nice little graphic there. It's okay because we're using incremental delivery. So we're going to have more and more versions, and if successful, we'll start to build these. And yes, David will say, well, business might change their mind, as you've already said. And the won't-haves might come back into play. We use lots of models to establish requirements, confirm expectations. We start with storyboards maybe to show how the screens are going to lay out. We can use lots of UML diagrams, but the best is to prototype. Say, this is, and then the user, but where's the this and this button? How do I get to the that and that? Well, what's that? I'll see straight away what's missing. And we use facilitated workshops. interactive communication, empowered personnel, rapid, high-quality decision-making, greater buy-in, building team spirit, clarification of issues, addressing a lot of the people issues with a professional facilitator. And the workshopping can be business. What's the business case, the scope, the risk, mitigation, the prioritization? These are all subjective things. But getting a decision. Any decision is better than no decision at all. Look at Brexit, no decision at all. It's a disaster, laughing stock. Technical. What are the technical options? The user classes, the data process models, acceptance testing, that can be facilitated. And the project management, the requirements, technical options, development plan, time box plan, prototyping, retrospectives, all can be workshopped. It's very collaborative. It puts far less pressure on the project manager to be the decision maker, because that's not the role. Jacinta Ardern was not making any decisions in that conference. She was just explaining what all of the New Zealand agencies would be doing. What is going to be the New Zealand response? And answering, preempting all of the press's questions and the questions of the community, of the victims, of the relatives, answering all the questions. It was really very, very professional. But she had sat down with her team, her advisors, and they'd put this together. And she's the figurehead and enjoying now the kudos that's coming from that. It'll be a textbook response probably. They've done an amazing job in responding. So iterative development. What we want to do is identify the objective for the next evolution, plan that. We can plan that with MS Project. Plan an iteration. Why not? Then evolve. We do a burn down chart of through the time box what we've achieved, and then we review. So time boxing, we kick off the project, the investigation for that iteration is 10 to 20% of the effort, then doing it, consolidating and closing out. So that's for one iteration. Typically 2 to 4 weeks. And then they make some recommendations about how the team should communicate. So you have distributed groups. What you want is face-to-face communication within a group, within the room, and then a single external channel via video chat, a representative. For another group, you've got a distributed team, is what they're recommending, as opposed to this, where you've got everybody's in front of a PC, conferencing, 12 individual, separate one-to-one communication channels. There's no group dynamics, and you've just got most people busy doing something else while they're pretending to be part of the video conference. That's what happens. So in terms of requirements here, the estimate accuracy to begin with is less accurate, and as time goes on becomes more accurate. And the requirements to begin with has less detail, and as time goes on becomes more detailed. This funnel, as we've talked about. We get increasing confidence here from feasibility to foundation, and then we do various time boxes and evolutionary development, and here is deployment and project management, and we've got control throughout the whole process here. And adding now, annotating the process diagram here, where you see the plans. So first of all, we've got the positioning of the project within a portfolio, that the project doesn't exist in isolation. Then we've got the plans for the time boxes, the delivery plan, planning for deployment. Here we've got feasibility, the initial project shaping and tentative schedule as a plan, foundations, what's going to be our strategy for iterative development, strategy for deployment, the time scale and costs. After we've determined feasibility, we then can get these more fine-grained plans. So we're adding the plans at the right time rather than doing big design up front, big documentation up front, which will be completely wrong.
Sorry, but then it will bring up the case that it will be very difficult to estimate what's the budget and otherwise.
Correct, correct. That's exactly what happens with DSDM, is that we don't have an accurate view here until we work through the foundations stage. But pre-project, we're doing a preliminary business case here, and we're doing a top-down budget, a guesstimate. But we can't confirm that until we know what's really involved.
Yeah, because it will be like a huge argument, like if you are like a vendor or you're an in-house PM, then they may argue as the project develops, like get more data, then I will ask you for more budget to get this project run through, like go through.
Yes. So what we've done, remember, we flipped the iron triangle, though. That's where the philosophy comes back. It's perfectly fine to have a fixed schedule and a fixed budget. It's no problem at all. Top down. This is how long you've got. This is how much money you've got. Perfectly fine. I'll tell you what I can deliver.
Okay, so we then limit the scope as well.
The scope, of course. So we tailor. This is not fixed. It's tailored. So as a separate topic to tailoring the approach, we tailor the approach to what we need. But interestingly, this is where the risks occur, is where we're not complying with the questionnaire, where the business vision is not clear or not understood. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So without knowing what are the business benefits required, we don't have good decision making as to what features to include. What are our priorities? For instance, with the electronic health record, what we saw in that briefing I gave you is the GUI. All the lovely buttons showing all the functionality of the system. But that's the easy bit, to design an imaginary GUI. What is exceptionally difficult is to integrate with all the complying systems. So here, this is a real problem that DSDM would uncover very quickly. And that is, you've got this vision of this fully functional system that can't be delivered. So do we cancel the project or do we change? And what the federal government has done is dumb down the system, de-scope the system to give us something which I think is the practical approach. Give us a repository of some useful things that'll be of some use to some doctors and patients at some time. Over time, it'll have more use to more people. But we start somewhere, otherwise we'll never get anywhere. Inability to prioritize the requirements. The project team doesn't have the collective knowledge and skills. That's where they need the facilitated workshop. All members of the project understand and accept their approach. They have to. That's a risk if they don't. And the business sponsor and visionary must demonstrate ownership. So, in conclusion, we have traditional project management, which is the waterfall. We have the stakeholders out here separate to the project. They're not part of the project team. Then we have the project manager who's busy doing his project plan on MS Project, who's done his Gantt chart as in assignment 1, who has the business analyst on his team as a technical person. The business analyst helps with the design. There is a developer the development team, design team, the development team builds the software, there is the testing team, there is a subject matter expert, a usability acceptance, doing the usability acceptance testing, that we've built it according to the design, according to the requirements, validation, but not verification, validation that we've built the system right, but there's no verification we've built the right system. And then you give them the system, and what do they say? I don't like it. We don't like it.
It's the wrong colour.
It's not what we expected.
There's no feng shui.
Wait, that is it the fault of the BA and the project manager?
It's a problem of the process. This is a traditional waterfall approach. It doesn't work in IT.
And even during requirements gathering, most of the business process owners don't really know the full scope of this stuff sometimes.
They don't. How would they?
It's only in the design phase that the legal process is somewhat designed, but it's not yet implementation.
Very good, Jake. Couldn't agree more. So at DSDM, there is constant communication with the stakeholders that starts with the business case here. And that part of the team is not just the project manager. The project manager, like Jacinta Ardern, is sitting here coordinating between the business visionary who works for the business sponsor and the tech coordinator. And this team here is working for the tech coordinator, doing the technical implementation. Certainly stuff has to be built, but coordinated, the project manager is coordinating formally with the business case, and then in foundations a very high level plan, and then in iterative plans, iteration plans, the project visions, I don't know, they've introduced in this diagram exceptions, but the point being is it's all negotiable here. So this is not a linear model, but a horizontal model, a collaborative model. So it changes the whole process. So a few questions and then an exercise for you. Okay? So some questions. We've got all of these preconditions here, slide 36. What sort of projects fail? Fail the preconditions. In the wrong slide. Free project. Oh yeah, yeah. 29. Correct. What sort of projects? When will this happen? Yeah, large bureaucratic ones. Because they want fixed requirements. I beg your pardon? Well, that was the original vision, but interestingly, the project has changed, has de-scoped immensely. My health record is alive and well. I think we've all missed the deadline to opt out now. Was that? Yeah, they did, but I think we've missed the last deadline. But it should be a continuous opportunity. Yeah. So they've had to accept a partial solution. Hey, you see, you can have it deleted at any time. That's good. So we've got a 90.1% national part because of the opt-out rather than opt-in. This is exactly what David was struggling with, this issue. We've got only 15,000 health professionals connected and 11.5 million clinical documents. So it's clearly being iteratively delivered. I'm listening.
Yeah, so basically in terms of, we're sort of identifying which project would fall into waterfall or agile, right?
Yes.
What if our